They say be careful who you step on your way up, because you might meet them on your way down. Richard Sterling thought he was the king of New York real estate. He had the penthouse, the Bentley, and the stunning young Mistress on his arm. The only thing standing in his way was Catherine, his quiet, plain, useless wife of 10 years. So, he threw her out into the rain like garbage. He thought she was a nobody. He didn't know that the homemaker he just evicted was actually the shadow CEO of the very conglomerate he was begging for money. Richard just started a war he couldn't afford to lose. The sound of a Louis Vuitton trunk hitting the marble floor of the foyer echoed like a gunshot. It was a violent, jarring noise that shattered the pristine silence of the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. Catherine Sterling didn't flinch. She stood at the top of the spiraling staircase, her hands folded neatly in front of her grey cardigan. She looked less like the lady of the house and more like part of the furniture, faded, silent, and easily overlooked. "Did you hear me, Catherine?" Richard's voice boomed from the bottom of the stairs. He was a handsome man, in that sharp, predatory way that Wall Street adored. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, his eyes cold. I said, "Get out." Beside him stood Jessica. She was 23, wearing a red dress that cost more than Richard's first car, and she was smirking. She didn't even try to hide it. She ran a manicured hand down Richard's arm, her eyes locking with Catherine's, with a look of pure, venomous triumph. "Richard," Catherine said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly so. "It's raining. It's nearly midnight." "I don't care if it's the apocalypse," Richard spat, kicking the trunk toward the heavy double doors. "I'm done, Kate. I'm done pretending that you fit in this world. Look at you. You're an embarrassment. I have investors coming to dinner next week from the Harrington Group. Do you have any idea how important that is? I can't have you sitting there talking about whatever it is you do all day. Knitting? Gardening? I manage the household, Richard. I manage your life," Catherine replied softly. "You manage nothing." Richard laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Jessica manages the PR for my firm now. She brings in clients. She shines in a room. You? You're just a shadow, and I'm tired of living in the dark." He walked up 2 steps, pointing a finger at her. "The divorce papers are on the kitchen island. I've been generous. You get the condo in Jersey and a monthly stipend for 2 years. Sign them, take your bags, and get out before I call security to drag you out." Jessica giggled, whispering something in Richard's ear that made him smirk. "Oh, and leave the jewelry," Jessica chirped, her voice saccharine sweet. "Richard bought those for his wife. Since you're not that anymore, I think they'll look better on me." Catherine looked at the woman. She looked at the husband she had supported for 10 years, the man she had met when he was a broke architecture student living in a basement in Queens. She remembered editing his thesis. She remembered secretly paying off his student loans with inheritance money she claimed came from a distant aunt. She remembered building him up, brick by brick, letting him take the spotlight while she stood in the wings. She slowly unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet from her wrist, a gift from their 5th anniversary. She walked down the stairs, the sound of her sensible flats barely audible against the stone. She stopped in front of Jessica. Up close, the girl smelled of overly sweet Chanel perfume and desperation. Catherine dropped the bracelet into Jessica's open palm. "Be careful what you wish for, Jessica," Catherine said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was clinical, like a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. "Just go, Catherine," Richard groaned, checking his Rolex. "I have a reservation at Le Bernardin in 20 minutes. Catherine turned to Richard. "You're trying to close the deal with the Harrington Group for the Hudson Yards project, aren't you?" Richard froze. "How do you know about that?" I never discuss business with you. You need that capital, or Sterling Architects goes bankrupt by the end of the quarter, Catherine continued, ignoring his question. You're over-leveraged on the Brooklyn development. You need Harrington to bail you out. I don't need a bailout, Richard roared, his face turning red. I am a visionary. And yes, once I sign with Harrington, I'll be a billionaire. And you'll be in Jersey clipping coupons. Now get out. Catherine walked to the kitchen, signed the papers with a Mont Blanc pen sitting on the counter, and left the ring on top of the document. She didn't ask for alimony. She didn't ask for half the company. She didn't ask for the penthouse. She walked to the door, grabbed the handle of her trunk, and opened the heavy oak door to the pouring rain of the Manhattan night. Goodbye, Richard, she said, without looking back. I hope the dinner is worth it. The door slammed shut. Richard let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He turned to Jessica, grinning. Finally, the dead weight is gone. Jessica wrapped her arms around his neck. You were so strong, baby. Now let's go celebrate. The future is ours. Outside, the rain soaked Catherine's grey cardigan instantly. She stood on the sidewalk of 57th Street, water dripping from her nose. A doorman from the neighbouring building looked at her with pity. Ma'am? Do you need a taxi? Catherine looked up. The dull, submissive look in her eyes vanished. Her posture straightened. The slouch of the tired housewife was gone, replaced by a spine of steel. She pulled a black smartphone from her pocket. Not the old model Richard allowed her to have, but a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. She dialed a number. This is Blackwood, a deep voice answered instantly. It's Catherine, she said. Her voice cut through the noise of the traffic like a blade. Initiate Protocol 0. There was a pause on the other end. Ma'am? Protocol 0 scuttles the Sterling account. It will bankrupt him. I know, Catherine said, watching the lights of her former penthouse flicker above. He wants a meeting with the Harrington Group? Give it to him. But make sure he meets the chairwoman, not a proxy. Understood, Miss Harrington. Shall I bring the car around? Yes. I'm done playing the housewife. It's time to go to work. 2 minutes later, a fleet of 3 black Cadillac Escalades screeched to a halt in front of her. 4 men in suits with earpieces jumped out, holding umbrellas to shield her from the rain. One of them took her trunk. Welcome back, CEO Harrington, the lead security officer said, opening the door. Catherine slid into the leather interior, wiping the rain from her face. She looked at the reflection of the penthouse one last time. Richard wanted a visionary, she whispered to herself. He's about to find out exactly who provided the vision. 3 days had passed since Richard kicked Catherine out. For Richard, they had been the best 3 days of his life. The freedom tasted like expensive scotch. He had moved Jessica into the penthouse immediately. She had already redecorated the master bedroom, throwing out Catherine's antique vanity and replacing it with a modern, gaudy mirrored station that looked like it belonged in a backstage dressing room. Richard sat in his office at Sterling Architects, overlooking the Hudson River. The office was a monument to his ego. Glass walls, chrome furniture, and architectural awards lining the shelves. Awards that, if he were honest, Catherine had helped write the submission essays for. But he pushed that thought away. Richard! Jessica burst into the office, bypassing his secretary. She was holding a tablet, her eyes wide. Look at this. Not now, Jess. I'm preparing for the preliminary meeting with the Harrington Group representatives. This deal is life or death. That's just it, she squealed. They just emailed. They bumped the meeting up, and look who's coming. Richard grabbed the tablet. His eyes scanned the official correspondence from Harrington Global Holdings. Dear Mr. Sterling, Regarding your proposal for the Hudson Yards revitalization, the board has reviewed your preliminary submission. Due to the high-risk nature of your current liquidity, we are bypassing the regional directors. You are invited to the Harrington Global Headquarters in Zurich this Friday to present your case directly to the Global Board and the chairwoman. Travel arrangements have been made. Richard dropped the tablet on his desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. The chairwoman? The ghost? Everyone in the business world knew of the Harrington chairwoman, but no one knew her face. She was a myth, a legend. She had taken over the Harrington Empire 10 years ago after her father's passing and tripled its value. She was known as the Ghost because she never appeared in press photos, never gave interviews, and operated through proxies. "I'm going to meet the Ghost," Richard whispered. "This is it, Jess. This is the big leagues. If I impress her, I'm not just rich. I'm royalty." "We need to go shopping," Jessica clapped. "Zurich? Oh my God, can I come?" Richard frowned. "No, this is strictly business. And honestly, Jess, you're great, but you're not seasoned enough for that room. Stay here. Keep the PR moving." Jessica pouted, but Richard was already dialing his CFO. He felt invincible. He had shed the dead weight of his wife, and the universe was immediately rewarding him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the atmosphere was very different. In a private hangar in Zurich, a Gulfstream G650 touched down smoothly. The tail number didn't exist on public flight trackers. As the stairs lowered, Catherine descended. She looked nothing like the woman in the grey cardigan. She wore a tailored white suit by Alexander McQueen that fit her like armour. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was now a sleek, sharp bob. She wore sunglasses, though it was overcast. A man in a dark suit waited on the tarmac. This was heavy-hitter territory. This was Silas Thorne, the public face of Harrington Global, the man Richard Sterling thought ran the company. "Madame Chairwoman," Thorne said, bowing his head slightly. "The board is assembled." "Good," Catherine said, walking briskly toward the waiting Maybach. "What is the status of Sterling Architects?" Thorne fell into step beside her. "It's grim. He's leveraged everything against this merger. If we deny the funding, his creditors will call in the loans by Monday morning. He will lose the business, the penthouse, the assets, everything." "And the prenuptial agreement?" Catherine asked as she slid into the car. "Ironclad. But since he forced you to sign divorce papers under duress and without full disclosure of assets, specifically his hidden offshore accounts in the Caymans, we have leverage. However, you signed a waiver of spousal support." Catherine smiled, a cold, dangerous curve of her lips. "I don't want his money, Silas. I have enough money to buy his entire life 10 times over. I want him to know who did this." "He arrives on Friday," Thorne said. "He believes he is coming to save his company. Let him believe it. I want the presentation to go ahead as planned. I want him to pitch his life's work to me. I want to see the look in his eyes when he realizes the useless housewife holds the pen that signs his checks." "And the mistress?" Thorne asked. "Jessica Vane," Catherine said, checking a dossier on her iPad. "She's been using the corporate credit card for personal expenses at Bergdorf's. Flag the expenses. Send an anonymous tip to the IRS regarding Sterling Architects' misappropriation of funds. Let's squeeze them from both sides." "Ruthless," Thorne noted with approval. "He told me I was holding him back," Catherine said, looking out the window as the Swiss Alps rolled by. "He told me I was a shadow. I'm just showing him what happens when the lights go out." Friday, Zurich. Richard Sterling walked into the headquarters of Harrington Global feeling like a god. The building was a fortress of steel and glass, overlooking the lake, The air smelled of money, old money. He was guided by a silent assistant through long corridors lined with original Picassos and warhogs. Finally, he reached the double doors of the boardroom. "Mr. Sterling," the assistant said, "the board is ready." Richard adjusted his tie. He had rehearsed this pitch 1,000 times. He walked in. The room was massive. A long mahogany table sat in the center. 12 people sat around it, men and women in suits that cost more than most houses. They were silent, staring at him. At the head of the table, a high-backed leather chair was turned away from him, facing the window. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Richard began, projecting his voice, "I am here to present a vision. A future where Sterling Architects and Harrington Global redefine the New York skyline." He launched into his pitch. He was charismatic, passionate. He showed slides. He threw out numbers. He felt the energy in the room. He was crushing it. "In conclusion," Richard said, sweating slightly, "Sterling Architects is the vessel, but we need the fuel. We need the partnership of Harrington Global to ascend." The room was silent. Silas Thorne, sitting to the right of the head chair, leaned forward. "Your numbers are impressive, Mr. Sterling, but our due diligence suggests your firm is fragile. You recently underwent a significant personal change? A divorce?" Richard waved his hand dismissively. "A minor distraction. My ex-wife was unsupportive. A simple woman with no head for business. Her departure has actually streamlined my focus. I am more dedicated than ever." "A simple woman," a voice said from the high-backed chair. Richard froze. The voice. It was lower, authoritative, heavily accented with a transatlantic lilt he didn't recognize, but the timbre. It sent a shiver down his spine. "That is how you described her," the voice continued. "Unsupportive?" The chair slowly began to swivel. "She cooked your meals," the woman said, the chair turning. "She managed your schedule." The chair faced him fully. "She paid off your student loans in 2014 so you wouldn't default," the woman said. Richard's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sitting in the chairwoman's seat was a woman who looked like Catherine. But it wasn't the Catherine he knew. This woman was radiant, terrifying and powerful. She wore diamonds that made the ones he bought Jessica look like glass. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently boring into his soul. "Hello, Richard," Catherine said, tenting her fingers. "I believe you have a pitch for me." Richard stumbled back, knocking into a side table. "Kate? What? How? You're the—" "I am Catherine Harrington," she corrected him. "CEO and majority shareholder of Harrington Global. And you, my dear husband, are currently trespassing in my boardroom." She stood up. The entire board stood with her. "You wanted a meeting with the decision-maker," she said, walking slowly toward him. "You wanted to step out of the dark. Well, Richard, welcome to the light." The silence in the boardroom of Harrington Global was heavy enough to crush lungs. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. Richard Sterling stood frozen, his hand still half raised in a gesture of confident presentation that now looked absurdly pathetic. He looked at the woman at the head of the table. His brain was misfiring, frantically trying to reconcile two impossible images. One was Catherine, the woman who wore oversized t-shirts to bed, who clipped coupons for groceries, and who quietly rubbed his shoulders after a long day while he complained about his genius being unrecognized. The other was this titan of industry, sitting in a chair that cost more than his car, surrounded by the sharks of the European banking world who looked at her with absolute reverence. "You," Richard choked out, his voice cracking. "You're Catherine. My Catherine." "I was," she said. Her voice was devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a judge delivering a death sentence. But you made it very clear that your Catherine was a liability, a simpleton, someone to be discarded so you could ascend. She gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. Sit down, Richard. You look like you're going to faint, and we have a lot of business to discuss. Richard sank into the chair. His legs felt like water. Is this a joke? Is this some kind of twin-sister revenge plot? Catherine Harrington. That's not possible. Your maiden name was Miller. My mother's maiden name, Catherine corrected smoothly. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. I took it when I was 18. Do you know why? Because when your last name is Harrington, no one looks at you. They look at the inheritance. They look at the connections. They look at the prey. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. The diamond on her finger caught the light, a sharp, cold flash. I wanted to be loved for who I was, Richard, not for what I could buy. When I met you in that coffee shop in Queens, you didn't know who I was. You just saw a girl reading a book you liked. I thought I had found it. The miracle. A man who loved me. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. But you didn't love me, did you? You loved the mirror I held up to you. You loved having a cheerleader, a servant. And the moment you thought you could do better, the moment you thought you found a shinier ornament in Jessica, you threw me away. I didn't know, Richard stammered. He looked around the table at the board members. They were impassive, stone-faced. They knew. They all knew. If I had known. That is exactly the point, Silas Thorne interjected from his seat. His voice was like gravel. If you had known, you would have stayed. You would have played the devoted husband. You would have spent her fortune. You proved your character in the dark, Mr. Sterling, and now you are being judged in the light. Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. His carefully gelled hair was starting to stick to his skin. Okay, look. We have history, Kate. 10 years. That has to count for something. We can fix this. I can fire Jessica. I can— Stop, Catherine said. The word was soft, but it stopped him instantly. You are not here as my husband, Richard. You dissolved that contract 3 days ago. You are here as the CEO of Sterling Architects, seeking a capital injection of $50 million to save your Hudson Yards project. She tapped a finger on the leather folder in front of her. Let's look at the numbers, shall we? She opened the folder. You claim Sterling Architects is solvent. Yet, my analysts found that you moved $2 million from the company operating account to a private LLC registered to Jessica Vane last month. You labeled it consulting fees. Richard's face went grey. She's the head of PR. It's legitimate. For a firm that is hemorrhaging cash. Catherine raised an eyebrow. And the Brooklyn development? You told the bank it was 80% occupied. The real number is 30%. You're cooking the books, Richard. Everyone does it, Richard yelled, his composure shattering. It's how the game is played. You know that. You've been watching me work for 10 years. Yes, Catherine said. I watched. I also corrected your math in the ledgers when you fell asleep on the couch. I rewrote your emails to investors so you didn't sound arrogant. I balanced your personal checkbook because you couldn't keep track of your own spending. You thought you were a genius, Richard. But you were a child playing with blocks, and I was the one holding the tower up. She closed the folder with a definitive snap. The Harrington Group is declining your application for funding, she announced. Richard felt the room spin. You can't. If you don't fund me, the loans get called. I'll lose everything. The penthouse, the firm, the cars. The Louis Vuitton trunk? Catherine suggested. Richard flinched as if she had slapped him. I'm not just denying the loan, Richard, Catherine continued. She stood up, walking over to the window to look out at the grey waters of Lake Zurich. I'm calling in the debt. What debt? I don't owe you anything. Who do you think bought the promissory notes for the Brooklyn project from Liberty Bank last week? Catherine asked, not turning around. Harrington Global owns your debt, Richard. All of it. And since you are in violation of the covenants due to your fraudulent reporting on occupancy rates, I am accelerating the payment. She turned to face him. The sun broke through the clouds, framing her in a halo of light. She looked magnificent. She looked untouchable. You have 48 hours to pay $40 million. Or I foreclose on Sterling Architects. And I take it all. Richard stood up, shaking. You're destroying me out of spite. This is personal. It became business the moment you brought your mistress into my house and told me I wasn't good enough to sit at your table, Catherine said coldly. You wanted a shark, Richard? You got one. Security will escort you out. Two large men stepped forward from the shadows of the room. Richard looked at Catherine one last time. He wanted to beg. He wanted to scream. But looking into her eyes, he saw nothing. The well of empathy he had drawn from for a decade had finally run dry. He turned and walked out, a dead man walking. The flight back to New York was a blur of terror. Richard sat in first class, staring at the screen of his phone, terrified to turn it on. He had flown commercial, business class, not private, because his corporate card had been declined at the charter terminal in Zurich. That was the first crack. When he finally landed at JFK, his phone exploded with notifications. 14 missed calls from his CFO, 3 from his lawyer, 7 from Jessica. He took a cab to the city. He couldn't afford the limo service anymore, though he would never admit that out loud. The rain was falling in Manhattan, just as it had been the night he kicked Catherine out. The city looked different now. It didn't look like his kingdom. It looked like a cage. He arrived at the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. The elevator ride up to the 80th floor felt like it took hours. When the doors opened, music was blasting. Dua Lipa thumped through the surround sound system. The apartment was full of people. Jessica was in the center of the living room, holding a magnum of champagne, surrounded by a group of hangers-on, models, and influencers. "Richard!" Jessica screamed, spotting him. She ran over, looking slightly tipsy. She threw her arms around him. "You're back! Did you get the money? Did you charm the ghost?" Richard looked at the party. He looked at the spilled champagne on the rug Catherine had spent months picking out. He looked at a stranger sitting on his Eames chair with his feet on the leather. "Get out," Richard whispered. Jessica pulled back. "What?" "Get out!" Richard roared, his voice tearing from his throat. "Everyone get out! Now!" The music cut. The room went silent. The guests, realizing the mood had shifted from party to domestic dispute, scrambled for their coats and the elevator. Within 2 minutes, the apartment was empty, save for the debris of the party. Jessica stood in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, looking annoyed rather than concerned. "You didn't have to be so rude. I was celebrating your return." "There's nothing to celebrate," Richard said, collapsing onto the sofa. He put his head in his hands. "It's over, Jess." "What do you mean?" She sat next to him, pouting. "Did the meeting go bad?" "Whatever, just go to another bank. You're Richard Sterling." "You don't understand," he groaned. "The chairwoman, the owner of Harrington Global. It's Catherine." Jessica blinked. "Catherine? Your ex-wife, Catherine? The one who wears cardigans and bakes muffins?" She let out a high-pitched laugh. "Richard, you're jet-lagged. That's impossible." "I saw her," Richard snapped, looking up with wild eyes. "She owns it all. She owns the bank, the investors, the debt. She owns us. She gave me 48 hours to pay $40 million or she takes the company. Jessica's face changed. The playful, seductive mistress mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. 40 million. But we have money. The accounts. Frozen, Richard said. I tried to buy a coffee at JFK. Declined. She's locking us down. Jessica stood up slowly. She walked over to the window, looking at her reflection. So, you're saying you're broke? I'm saying we're in a war, Richard said, standing up and reaching for her. But we're in it together, right? You said we were a power couple. We can fight this. We can sell the Hamptons house. We can... The Hamptons house is in your name, Jessica said sharply. If she seizes your assets, that goes too. Jess? Richard looked at her, confusion clouding his panic. Jessica turned to him. There was no love in her eyes. There was only arithmetic. She was calculating her losses. I didn't sign up for this, Richard, she said coldly. I signed up for the billionaire architect, not the bankrupt fraud being hunted by his ex-wife. You said you loved me. I loved the life you gave me, she yelled back. I'm 23 years old. I'm not going to spend my prime years visiting you in debtor's prison or living in a studio apartment in Queens. You promised me the world, and now you're telling me your useless wife actually owns it? She scoffed, grabbing her purse from the counter. God, that is pathetic. She played you. She played you like a fiddle for 10 years, and you didn't even notice. Where are you going? Richard asked as she headed for the door. I'm going to a hotel, she said. And don't bother calling. I need to think about my options. You can't leave me. Not now. Watch me, she said. The elevator doors closed, leaving Richard alone in the silent, messy apartment. The same silence he had inflicted on Catherine 3 days ago now suffocated him. He walked to the window. He looked down at the city. He felt small. His phone rang. It wasn't Jessica. It was a blocked number. He answered it, his hand trembling. Hello? Hello, Richard. Catherine's voice came through, crystal clear. I assume the party is over. Richard sank to his knees on the floor. Catherine, please. I'll do anything. I'll sign the company over. Just don't destroy me publicly. Don't ruin my name. Your name? Catherine mused. That's interesting, because I have a document here on my desk. It's a foreclosure notice for the building you're currently standing in, 432 Park Avenue. This is my home, Richard sobbed. No, Catherine said. It was our home. Then you made it yours. Now? It's mine. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to vacate the premises. If you are still there, the marshals will remove you. Where am I supposed to go? I hear the rental market in Queens is reasonable this time of year, Catherine said. Perhaps you can find a basement apartment, like the one you lived in when I found you. Catherine, wait. Goodbye, Richard. Protocol 0 is in full effect. The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone. He looked around the luxury he had sacrificed his morality to obtain. It was all smoke. The only real thing in his life had been the woman he pushed out the door. And now she was coming for the rest. The sun rose over Central Park, casting a golden light that usually filled Richard Sterling with a sense of ownership. He used to stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, coffee in hand, surveying Manhattan like a monarch inspecting his domain. Today, the light felt like an interrogation lamp. Richard sat on the edge of the California king bed, still wearing the wrinkled suit from the flight. He hadn't slept. The digital clock on the bedside table read 8:45 a.m. He had 15 minutes left. The penthouse was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one Catherine used to inhabit. Hers was a silence of peace, of order. This was the silence of a tomb. He stood up, his joints stiff. He looked around the room. He grabbed a duffel bag, not the Louis Vuitton trunk, which was too heavy to carry alone, and started throwing things into it. A few shirts, his laptop, his shaving kit. He went to the safe behind the painting. He keyed in the code. It beeped, flashing green, and swung open. It was empty. Richard stared into the dark metal box. The stack of emergency cash, about $50,000 he kept for rainy days, was gone. The Patek Philippe watches were gone. The gold bullion coins were gone. "Jessica," he whispered, a dry, rasping sound. She hadn't just left. She had looted him. While he was begging for his life on the phone with Catherine, she must have been filling her purse. Ding-dong. The doorbell didn't sound friendly. It sounded official. Richard zipped the bag. He walked through the hallway, passing the photos on the wall. Photos of him receiving awards. Photos of him shaking hands with mayors. He realized now that in every single photo, Catherine was there, usually just out of focus, or standing slightly to the side, holding his coat or his plaque. She had always been there, the mortar holding the bricks together. He opened the door. 3 men stood there. 2 were in the uniforms of the U.S. Marshals. One was a suit-wearing representative from the bank, Harrington Global's bank. "Mr. Sterling," the suit said. He didn't offer a hand. "I'm here to execute the writ of possession. The property has been foreclosed upon. You need to vacate immediately." I need more time," Richard said, his voice trembling. "My lawyer is filing an injunction." The injunction was denied at 8 a.m. by Judge Halloway, the suit said calmly. "It seems your legal retainer check bounced, Mr. Sterling. Your counsel has withdrawn." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Bounced? Insufficient funds. Now please step aside. We need to secure the premises. The marshals stepped forward. They weren't aggressive, just efficient. They treated him like an obstacle, a piece of furniture in the wrong place. Richard walked out into the hallway. The door to apartment 80A closed behind him with a heavy, final thud. He stood in the corridor, holding a gym bag, wearing a wrinkled suit. He took the elevator down. Not the private express elevator. His key fob had already been deactivated. He took the service elevator. When he spilled out onto the street, the morning rush of New York was in full swing. People bumped into him, ignoring him. A week ago, a black car would have been waiting. A driver would have taken his bag. Now, he was just another guy on the sidewalk looking lost. It started to drizzle, a cold, grey rain that soaked into his expensive wool suit. Richard walked. He didn't know where he was going. He checked his phone. He had $400 in his checking account. His credit cards were dead. His assets were frozen, pending the fraud investigation Catherine had mentioned. He walked past a newsstand. A bold headline on the New York Post caught his eye. Sterling Silver turns to rust. Architect accused of fraud. Wife files for hostile takeover. There was a picture of him. An unflattering one where he looked sweaty and angry. And next to it, a silhouette of a woman. They didn't have a picture of Catherine. Even now, she was a ghost. Richard bought a coffee from a street cart with loose change. It burned his tongue. He sat on a wet bench in Bryant Park, watching the pigeons fight over a crust of bread. "I'm the pigeon," he muttered to himself, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in his chest. "I'm the pigeon." 2 weeks later, the headquarters of Sterling Architects was a buzz of activity, but not the kind Richard had ever presided over. Painters were already working on the lobby wall. The silver letters spelling Sterling were being pried off, leaving ghost-like outlines on the marble. They were being replaced by a sleek, minimalist logo, HS, Harrington X. Sterling. Up on the top floor, in what used to be Richard's office, Catherine stood looking out the window. She had changed the room. The chrome and glass were gone, replaced by warmer woods and soft lighting. It no longer looked like a showroom for an ego. It looked like a place where work got done. "The transition is smooth," Silas Thorne said, standing by the desk. "We've retained 90% of the staff. They seem relieved, actually. Apparently, Richard's management style was volatile. He ruled by fear," Catherine said quietly. "And fear is a poor foundation for loyalty." "Speaking of Richard," Silas said, hesitating slightly. "He's in the lobby." Catherine turned. Her face was impassive. "Is he?" "Security stopped him. He's demanding to see you. He's making a scene. He looks unwell, Catherine." Catherine walked over to her desk, Richard's old desk, and sat down. She smoothed the fabric of her skirt. "Let him up." "Are you sure? He's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Catherine said. "He's just empty. Bring him up." 5 minutes later, the doors opened. Richard Sterling walked in. Or rather, he shuffled in. He had lost 20 pounds. His suit was the same one from the eviction, now stained and hanging loosely on his frame. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room, trying to find a familiar anchor in a space that had been erased. He stopped in the middle of the room. He looked at Catherine. She looked radiant, powerful. She was reviewing a blueprint, his blueprint for the Hudson Yards project, with a red pen. "You changed the reception area," Richard said hoarsely. It was a stupid thing to say, but his mind was fragmented. "It was inefficient," Catherine replied without looking up. "Too much wasted space. We turned it into a collaborative workspace for the junior architects." Richard took a step forward. "Kate, please. I'm living in a motel in Queens, the one by the airport. The sheets smell like smoke. I can't live like this." Catherine finally looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were not sad. They were simply clear. "You lived in a basement in Queens for 3 years, Richard. You seemed fine then." "That was different. We were young. We had a future." "We had a future because I was building it for you," she corrected. "I was paying the rent. I was buying the groceries. I was editing your drafts. You were never fine, Richard. You were carried." "Okay, I admit it," Richard screamed, falling to his knees. The sound was pathetic, a dull thud on the carpet. "I'm a fraud. I'm nothing without you. Is that what you want to hear? I'm useless. You win. You win." He began to sob, his head bowed. "Just, please give me something. A job, a consultant role, anything. I built this company." Catherine stood up and walked around the desk. She stopped a few feet from him. She didn't offer a hand to help him up. "You didn't build this company, Richard. You marketed it. The designs, the concepts, they were good, yes. But the execution, the solvency, the relationships, that was me. That was always me, from the shadows." She sighed, a sound of genuine fatigue. "I'm not going to hire you, Richard. You are a liability. Your name is toxic in this industry right now. The fraud investigation is ongoing." Richard looked up, tears streaking the grime on his face. "So you're just going to let me starve?" "No," Catherine said. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a white envelope. She tossed it onto the floor in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, staring at it. "It's a plane ticket," she said. "One way. To Idaho." "Idaho? My family owns a ranch there. Not the Harrington estate. A working ranch. My uncle needs a hand. Fixing fences, clearing stables, manual labor, honest work." Richard stared at her in horror. "You want me to be a farmhand? I'm an architect. I'm a visionary." "You were an architect," Catherine said coldly. "Now you are a man with no home, no money, and a looming indictment. If you go to Idaho, the legal team at Harrington Global will settle the fraud charges with a plea deal for probation. You stay out of prison. You get a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. You learn what it means to actually work for a living." She turned her back on him, walking toward the window to look at the city skyline, her skyline. "Or," she said, "you can walk out that door, face the FBI on your own, and continue trying to find Jessica. Though I should warn you, my sources say she's currently in Miami with a cryptocurrency promoter. I don't think she's missing you." Richard's hand hovered over the envelope. His pride screamed at him to tear it up, to spit on the floor, to storm out. But his stomach growled. The memory of the cold motel room shivered through him. He realized with a crushing finality that the man he thought he was, Richard Sterling, the King of New York, had never really existed. He was a costume, and the show was over. He reached out and took the envelope. Does the job pay?" he whispered. "Minimum wage," Catherine said. "It's more than you started with." Richard stood up slowly. He held the ticket like a lifeline. He looked at Catherine's back. He wanted to say sorry. He wanted to say thank you. But he knew he had lost the right to speak to her at all. "Goodbye, Catherine," he said. "Goodbye, Richard," she replied, not turning around. He walked out of the office. The heavy glass door clicked shut. Catherine stood alone in the silence. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel happy. She just felt lighter. The dead weight was finally gone. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Silas?" "Yes, Madam Chairwoman." "Send in the team for the Hudson Yards briefing. We have a city to build." 1 year later. The wind in Idaho didn't care about your net worth. It didn't care if you used to wear Brioni suits or if you had once been featured in Architectural Digest. It just cut right through you, freezing the sweat on your back instantly. Rick, he didn't go by Richard anymore, drove the post-hole digger into the hard, half-frozen earth of the Harrington Ranch. His hands, once soft and manicured, were now covered in calluses and permanent grime. His fingernails were split. His back ached with a constant, dull throb that he had simply learned to live with. "Put your back into it, Sterling," yelled Old Man Miller, Catherine's uncle. He was a man of 70 who could still outwork men half his age. He sat on the fence, chewing a toothpick, watching Rick with a hawk's eye. "I'm digging, Silas." "I'm digging," Rick grunted, heaving the tool up. It had been 14 months since he stepped off the plane in Boise, with nothing but a duffel bag and a shattered ego. The first month had been hell. He had vomited from exhaustion. He had cried himself to sleep in the bunkhouse that smelled of sawdust and wet dogs. He had tried to quit 3 times, walking to the highway to hitchhike, only to realize he had nowhere to go. No friends, no money, no Jessica. News traveled even to rural Idaho. He had read the papers in the town general store. Jessica Vane had been arrested in Miami 6 months ago for her involvement in a Ponzi scheme. She was currently awaiting trial, facing 10 years. The love of his life was just a grifter looking for the next mark. And Catherine? Catherine was untouchable. Harrington Sterling, which she had renamed Harrington Vanguard, was now the leading architectural firm in the world. She was on the cover of Forbes, Time, and Vogue. She had launched a foundation for single mothers. She was a queen. A black SUV kicked up dust on the long driveway leading to the ranch house. Rick froze. He knew that car. He leaned on the shovel, his heart doing a strange flip in his chest. It wasn't hope. He had killed that ghost a long time ago. It was shame. The car stopped near the main fence. The driver opened the door and Catherine stepped out. She was wearing jeans and a thick wool coat, her hair loose in the wind. She didn't look like the terrifying CEO in the boardroom, and she didn't look like the invisible housewife he had ignored. She looked happy. There was a lightness to her step that he had never seen when they were married. She walked over to the fence, greeting her uncle with a hug. Then she turned to Rick. He didn't know what to do. Should he bow? Should he apologize again? He just took off his dirty hat and held it to his chest. "Hello, Richard," she said. "It's Rick now," he said, his voice raspy from the cold. "Richard stayed in New York." Catherine nodded, her eyes scanning him. She looked at his rough hands, his weathered face, the way he stood, grounded, not posturing. "Uncle Silas tells me you're his best worker," she said. "Says you fixed the barn roof in a blizzard." "I didn't have much choice," Rick shrugged. "The horses needed shelter." The old Richard would have hired someone to do it and taken credit for the design, Catherine noted, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The old Richard was a fool," he replied quietly. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I read about the Hudson Yards project, the completion. It's magnificent, Catherine, the way you integrated the green space. It was brilliant. It was your initial sketch, she said. I just made it buildable. No, he shook his head. It was your vision. It was always you. I was just the draftsman. He took a deep breath. The cold air stung his lungs. "Thank you," he said. Catherine raised an eyebrow. "For what? For bankrupting you? For exiling you to Idaho?" "For stopping me," he said. "If you hadn't done this, if you had just let me divorce you and take half your money, I would be dead. Or in jail with Jessica. I was drowning in my own arrogance, Kate. I didn't know how to be a man. I only knew how to be a star. Being here, working the land, waking up sore every day. It's the first real thing I've ever done." He looked down at his muddy boots. "I'm not happy. I miss the heating. I miss the sushi. But I sleep at night. I don't have to lie to anyone anymore. Not even myself." Catherine watched him for a long moment. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She reached into a coat pocket. For a second, Rick thought she was going to hand him a check. A reward. A ticket back. Instead, she pulled out a small envelope. "I'm getting married, Rick," she said softly. The world stopped for a second. It was the final nail in the coffin of his past life. "He's a good man," she continued. "He's a pediatric surgeon. He doesn't care about my money. He doesn't even know how to check the stock market. He loves me for the muffins I bake." Rick felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. He nodded, forcing a smile that hurt his face. That's good, Catherine. You deserve that. You always did." "I wanted you to know," she said, "because despite everything, you were a part of my life for 10 years, and I wanted to see if you were okay." "I'm okay," Rick said. "I'm exactly where I belong." She nodded. "Uncle Silas says you're free to go if you want. The probation period is over. You've worked off your debt to the company." Rick looked at the open gate. He looked at the long road stretching out toward the horizon. He could leave. He could try to go back to the city, maybe get a job as a draftsman, try to climb the ladder again. He looked back at the half-finished fence, at the horses grazing in the distance, at the silence of the mountains that didn't demand anything from him except honest labor. "No," Rick said. "I think I'll stay. The fence isn't finished yet." Catherine smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile, a final goodbye. "Take care of yourself, Rick. You too, Catherine." She got back into the car. Rick watched as the black SUV turned around and drove away, disappearing into a cloud of dust. He watched until the taillights were just red specks in the distance. He stood there for a long time. Then he put his hat back on, picked up the shovel, and slammed it back into the earth. He had lost his fortune. He had lost his wife. He had lost his name. But as the sweat broke on his brow and the cold wind bit his face, Richard Sterling realized he had finally found his soul, and that was a trade he would make again in a heartbeat. In the end, Richard Sterling learned the hardest lesson of all. True worth isn't found in bank accounts or penthouses, but in character. He spent 10 years looking for a trophy, blind to the treasure he already had at home. Catherine didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She didn't just strip him of his wealth, she stripped him of his delusions. Sometimes, life has to break us down completely to build us back up into something real. Richard lost the world, but he found his humanity in the mud of an Idaho ranch. It's a reminder to all of us. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never value the shine of the moment over the gold of a lifetime. Be careful who you discard today, for they might be the only ones holding the keys to your tomorrow. If this story gave you chills, or if you think Richard got exactly what he deserved, hit that like button right now. What would you have done if you were Catherine? Would you have forgiven him? Or would you have sent him to the ranch just like she did? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story about karma, justice, and the twists of life. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.